The night everything changed, I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta when the doorbell rang, one of those long, nervous rings that instantly tells you something is wrong. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not that late. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked toward the door, and felt this strange heaviness settle in my chest. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there, under the weak porch light, was my dad, holding two oversized suitcases, looking exhausted, older than I'd ever seen him, and strangely unsure of himself. It was the kind of moment where your mind tries to catch up but your heart already knows something bad has happened. Just days earlier, I had learned the shocking news that he had sold our family home, the one place that held decades of memories, without telling me anything. The house where I grew up, the house my mother loved, the house filled with photos, holiday traditions, and all the small pieces that built our family. And the part that hurt even more was that he handed my brother $500,000 from the sale. Not a portion. Not a shared amount. The entire windfall. My brother got everything while I didn't even get a phone call. I was left completely in the dark, wondering how something so big could be decided without me, wondering why I suddenly felt like I didn't belong in my own family's story. So seeing my dad on my doorstep with no home to go back to and no explanation yet, stirred everything inside me: anger, confusion, worry, and a tiny bit of guilt that I couldn't quite explain. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me with this tired expression, like he'd been carrying a weight for too long and finally realized he couldn't keep holding it alone. I didn't step aside immediately. I just stared at him, trying to read his face. Trying to understand how the same man who raised me with lessons about fairness and family loyalty could make such a painful decision and then show up without warning, expecting what? Comfort? Forgiveness? Shelter? The days leading up to that moment had been filled with nonstop questions swirling in my mind. Why my brother? Why all the money? Why keeping me out of something so major? My brother and I had always had a complicated relationship, but nothing that would justify such a drastic difference in treatment. Growing up, he was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one Dad always defended even when he didn't deserve it. I assumed that favoritism would fade as we became adults. I assumed wrong. Apparently, it had only grown stronger, reaching a level I never imagined. When I first heard about the sale, it wasn't from my dad. It wasn't even from my brother. It was from an old neighbor who sent me a shocked message asking why everything had been packed up so quickly. That's how I discovered that the home I thought would always be part of our family history was suddenly someone else's property. The sting of being excluded was so sharp that I had to sit down. It felt like losing more than just walls and windows. It felt like losing my place in my own family. But now, seeing Dad standing there, clearly hoping I would let him in, brought all those emotions crashing together. I kept thinking about that $500,000. $500,000. Life-changing money. Money that could have helped me buy my own home, pay off loans, build stability. Money my dad knew I could have used. And yet, he gave it all to my brother. No explanation, no discussion, no warning. As I stood there in the doorway, all those memories and questions tangled together. I remembered moments from childhood. Dad cheering at my school events, Dad helping me with homework, Dad giving me advice about being responsible and staying grounded. Those moments clashed sharply with the man in front of me now, a man who had made a decision that shattered something inside me, a man who looked like he needed me but wouldn't say why. He finally spoke my name, softly, almost like he wasn't sure he had the right to say it. Hearing him say it like that made my stomach twist. The tone was unfamiliar, weak, strained, almost apologetic. It wasn't like him. My dad had always been strong, firm, the kind of person who never hesitated. But this version of him looked lost. I wanted to ask him everything right then: why he sold the house, why he gave the money away, why he left me out, and why he was standing in front of me now. But the questions caught in my throat. I didn't want to explode, and I didn't want to break down either. I just needed a second to breathe, to think, to figure out whether opening the door wider meant opening myself to another hurt I wasn't ready for. And yet, something inside me kept pushing. Maybe it was the part of me that still cared even after everything. Maybe it was the part that feared something terrible had happened. Or maybe it was the part that simply wanted answers, real ones, not excuses. My dad shifted his weight like his suitcases were getting heavier by the second. He didn't push to come inside, didn't ask, didn't assume. He just waited. That silence between us felt thick enough to choke on. Behind him, the street was quiet, dim, almost eerie. His car wasn't near the driveway. He must have taken a ride, which only made the situation feel stranger. This wasn't just a casual visit. This was something serious. A part of me wondered if my brother knew where Dad was. Had something happened between them? Had something gone wrong with the money? Or was Dad here because he had finally realized the consequences of his choices and didn't know where else to go? Whatever the truth was, I knew one thing. This moment was only the beginning. Something big, something messy, emotional, and deeply personal, was unfolding right in front of me. And I had no idea whether letting him in would lead to healing, or a whole new wave of heartbreak. But before I could decide, before I could even open my mouth to speak, my dad said something, quiet, trembling, unexpected, that changed everything about the night. And in that single sentence, I realized the real story hadn't even started yet. He looked me straight in the eyes and his voice cracked in a way I had never heard before. I didn't know where else to go. That single sentence hung in the air, heavy and confusing. My dad, this man who always acted like he had everything figured out, the same man who raised me to be independent and tough, was standing on my doorstep admitting he had nowhere else to turn. It didn't make sense. Not after what he had just done. Not after selling the family home and handing my brother $500,000 like I didn't exist. I stepped aside and let him in, mostly because I didn't want my neighbors watching, but partly because curiosity hit me harder than anger in that moment. He dragged his suitcases over the threshold with slow, tired movements, like he was carrying more than just clothes. I could tell he was waiting for me to explode or question him immediately, but I stayed silent. I didn't want to let emotions take over before I understood what was actually happening. He sat down on the edge of my couch, shoulders hunched, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. It was strange seeing him like that, small, unsure, almost fragile. I stood opposite him, not sitting, not moving closer, just watching. My heart was racing but my face stayed cold. I wasn't ready to offer comfort. Not yet. The room felt unusually quiet, like even the walls were waiting for him to explain himself. But he didn't. Instead, he looked around my living room, noticing the small things, the framed photos, the folded blankets, the plant I kept by the window. I could tell he was avoiding eye contact. Maybe scared of what he would see on my face. I finally asked the question burning inside me. Why are you here? He swallowed hard and looked down at his hands. I needed some time, and I needed to be somewhere safe. Safe? From what? That word alone brought a wave of confusion. My dad wasn't the type to run from anything. He was always the one telling everyone else to face their problems head-on. Hearing him say he needed safety felt wrong, almost unreal. I waited for him to explain, but he didn't. He just kept sitting there, shoulders tense, breathing unevenly. The silence stretched longer and longer, building more suspense, more questions, more frustration. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. The house, the money, my brother. Why did he give everything away? Why was he here now? What was he running from? I wanted to ask all of it, but I needed him to talk first. So instead I asked something simpler. Does my brother know you're here? His eyes lifted slowly and there was something in them I couldn't read. Not guilt exactly. Not fear either. Something in between. He knows I left. He paused. But he doesn't know where I went. That only made things stranger. Why would Dad hide from him? They had always been close, closer than he ever was with me. My brother was the one who always got the extra support, extra praise, extra everything. So what could have possibly happened that pushed my dad to show up at my place instead? I sat down finally, keeping a little distance. Dad, you sold the house. You gave him everything. And now you're here saying he doesn't know where you went. My voice shook with a mix of confusion and hurt. I need you to tell me what's going on. He looked away again, staring at the window like the answer was outside somewhere. His jaw tightened, and I could see him trying to gather his thoughts. But instead of an explanation, he said something that only deepened the mystery. Things aren't what they look like. I almost laughed, out of disbelief, not amusement. Then explain them, I said. Because right now they look pretty messed up. He nodded, almost agreeing with me, but still didn't give me a straight answer. Instead, he sighed deeply and leaned back, looking exhausted. The kind of tired that isn't just physical. It's emotional, mental, the kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. I didn't push further. Not yet. I could tell he wasn't ready to talk. So I told him he could sleep in the guest room. He thanked me quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. It felt strange hearing that softness from him. He wasn't a soft person by nature. As he carried his suitcases down the hallway, I watched him closely. He moved slower than usual, almost like each step took effort. Something was definitely off. Something big. Something Dad was afraid to admit. When he finally shut the guest room door, I stood alone in the living room, my mind spinning. I replayed every detail of the past few months, looking for signs I had missed. Looking for clues. Looking for anything that could make sense of what was happening. The sale of the family home had happened too fast. One day the house was fine, and the next day it was on the market. No warning. No conversation. No mention of financial trouble or emergency. My dad had always been careful with money. He never made reckless choices. So selling the home so suddenly didn't align with who he was. And giving my brother $500,000? That made even less sense. My brother wasn't struggling. He wasn't sick, unemployed, or in danger. He didn't need that kind of help. So why would Dad drain everything and leave himself with nothing? As those questions echoed in my head, I realized something else strange. My dad didn't bring anything besides the suitcases. No documents, no folders, no envelopes. Not even his laptop that he always kept for work. It was like he had left in a hurry. The next morning, I found him awake early, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee he clearly didn't drink. His eyes were bloodshot as if he barely slept. When he saw me, he forced a small smile, tired, sad, almost grateful. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said quietly. I nodded, but I didn't smile back. "When you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen." He nodded too, but his gaze shifted again. And that told me he wasn't ready. Not even close. The rest of the day carried a strange tension. He stayed in the guest room, coming out only for water or to sit silently in the living room. He jumped a little whenever his phone buzzed from the other room. Once, I heard him decline a call using the softest tone, like he didn't want the caller to know he was even awake. And every time the phone rang, my stomach twisted a little more. Was it my brother? Was it about the money? Was someone looking for him? By evening, the suspense had stretched so tightly it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I watched him from the doorway as he stared at the blank TV screen, hands clasped again. He looked like a man carrying a secret that was eating him alive. And I knew this wasn't temporary. Whatever had happened, whatever pushed him to my doorstep with suitcases, whatever drove him away from my brother, whatever made him give away everything he owned, it was bigger, heavier, and far more complicated than I imagined. But before I could ask again, before I could demand answers, his phone buzzed on the table. This time he didn't ignore it. He picked it up, looked at the screen, and his face drained of color. He whispered almost to himself, "I knew this was coming." And with that, the next piece of the mystery slowly, painfully began to unravel. He stared at his phone for a long moment, like the screen itself had turned into something threatening. I could see the way his hand trembled slightly, the way his jaw tightened as he tried to steady himself. Whoever was calling or texting wasn't just someone he didn't want to talk to. It was someone he was genuinely afraid of. That alone made my heart beat faster. My dad, who had never backed down from anything, looked like he'd just been cornered. He set the phone face down on the table and let out a shaky breath. I didn't pressure him, but I couldn't pretend I didn't notice. "Is it my brother?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. Not yes, not no, just silence, heavy and uncomfortable. The kind of silence that tells you the truth without a single word. That silence told me something was terribly wrong. He eventually got up and walked into the kitchen, pouring himself another cup of coffee he wouldn't drink. I followed him slowly, still watching, still waiting for him to say anything that would give me even a piece of clarity. But he kept his back turned, shoulders hunched like he was carrying a secret that had become too heavy. As much as I wanted answers, a part of me also feared what the answers might be. Because this wasn't just about favoritism or unfair treatment anymore. This felt deeper, darker, more complicated. Later that afternoon, while he sat in the living room staring at the floor, I stepped into the guest room where he'd been staying. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to understand what kind of situation he was in. Maybe he had paperwork, or maybe he'd left something out that would explain why he was hiding, why he'd abandoned everything, why he'd run to me instead of the son he always favored. But the room was surprisingly empty. His suitcases were neatly placed in the corner, zipped shut. He hadn't unpacked a single thing, not clothes, not toiletries, nothing. As if he wasn't planning to stay long. Or as if he was afraid to settle in. I went back into the living room and sat across from him. "Dad," I said softly, "you came here for a reason. I don't know what it is yet, but I think it's time you tell me what's going on." He rubbed his forehead, looking worn out. "There are things you don't understand," he murmured. "That's because you haven't explained them." He sighed again, that same tired sound he'd been making since he arrived. Then he finally spoke. "Your brother, he's not handling things well." My heart skipped. "Handling what?" "Responsibility," he said. "Pressure. Some decisions he made, they didn't go the way he expected. That wasn't enough. I needed more." "Are you saying the money caused problems?" He shook his head, but it wasn't a denial, it was more like regret. It's complicated. Everything was complicated, apparently. Yet he refused to unravel any of it. Before I could push again, his phone lit up on the table, buzzing loudly in the quiet room. Dad stiffened instantly. His eyes locked onto the phone like it was something dangerous. This time it wasn't a call. It was a series of messages. The screen lit up again and again, vibrating against the wooden table. My dad didn't touch it. He looked frozen. I didn't dare lean in to read them, but I could see his name flash at the top. My brother's name. Dad swallowed hard. "He's angry," he whispered. The word angry didn't scare me. Not at first. My brother had always been hot-headed. But the fear in Dad's voice, that scared me. This wasn't about a simple disagreement. This was something bigger. I pulled out a chair and sat down, trying to steady my own breathing. What? What did he say? Dad didn't show me the messages. He just rubbed his eyes again. "He feels like I abandoned him." "But you didn't," I said. "You gave him everything. You gave him the entire $500,000. You gave him the house money. How could he feel abandoned?" Dad shook his head slowly. "Because he thinks that's the problem." That made no sense. None. How could giving him the money be the problem? Dad didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, "I should never have done it." The admission hit me hard. For a second, I forgot my own anger, my own hurt. It felt like he was talking about something dangerous, something that had spiraled beyond his control. The tension in the air grew thicker by the minute. Hours passed with him pacing the living room, checking the windows, keeping his phone face down but never out of reach. I watched him carefully, noticing every small detail, how he jumped at unexpected noises, how he double-locked the front door, how he seemed afraid to turn off the lights. My home had become a place filled with quiet panic. At one point he finally sat again, his hands shaking as he ran them through his thinning hair. "I made a mistake," he murmured. "What mistake?" He looked up at me, and for the first time since he arrived, I saw sheer guilt in his eyes. "Your brother wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. He wasn't ready for the pressure. He wasn't thinking clearly when he asked for the money." He paused, eyes darkening. "And I wasn't thinking clearly when I gave it to him." "So he asked for it?" I asked. "The whole $500,000? Dad didn't answer directly. "He said he needed help," he continued. "He said he had plans, big plans. He made everything sound urgent and important." Another pause. I trusted him. My stomach twisted. I knew my brother well enough to know he could be convincing when he wanted something. But convincing enough to make our dad sell the family home? Convincing enough to get him to hand over everything he had without question? What plans did he have? And what had gone wrong? Dad's phone buzzed again. This time he picked it up, hands shaking so much he nearly dropped it. He read the new message and I watched his breathing falter. "Dad?" I whispered. "What is he saying?" He hesitated, a long, painful pause, then closed his eyes. "He thinks I ran away with something that belongs to him." The words hit me like a slap. Belongs to him? Dad, he got everything. Dad shook his head. Not everything he wanted. That made a chill run through me. What more could my brother possibly want? I walked to the window and looked out. The street was quiet, but the quiet suddenly felt unsettling. Like something could appear at any moment. Like someone was watching. Dad's phone buzzed again, but he didn't check it. He looked too overwhelmed, too scared of what the next message might say. I turned back to him. "Dad, you need to tell me what he's capable of." My father's expression shifted. Not anger, not sadness, but something closer to dread. "Your brother? He isn't the same person anymore." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" "He's changed," Dad whispered. "He's making choices that don't make sense. He's upset about things I can't control. And he's blaming me for everything that went wrong." "Like what?" Dad stared at his shaking hands. "The people he got involved with, the promises he made, the pressure he's under." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "It's not just him anymore." That sentence made the hair on my arms stand up. Not just him? Who else was involved? Before I could ask another question, a car slowed down outside my house. I heard the soft crunch of tires against the curb. Dad's head snapped up. His face went pale. He rushed to the window and peeked out with the smallest movement. Then he stepped back, panicked. "It's starting," he murmured. The fear in his voice was real, shivering, raw, and undeniable. And in that moment I realized something terrifying. Whatever this conflict was, whatever my brother had gotten himself into, whatever had forced my dad to abandon everything he owned and run, it had just found us. The car outside didn't move for a long moment. It just sat there, engine humming softly, headlights off, too quiet and too still for it to be someone randomly parking on the street. I could feel the tension in the air tighten, like the whole house was holding its breath again. My dad stepped away from the window, rubbing his hands together nervously. His face looked drained, almost like he was preparing himself for something he knew was coming. I walked over to the window slowly and peeked out between the curtains. The car was dark, impossible to see who was inside, but it was positioned directly across from my house. There were plenty of empty spots on the street. They didn't need to park there unless they wanted a clear view of my front door. That realization made my stomach twist. "Dad," I said quietly, "who is that?" He shook his head, but I could tell he knew. Or at least suspected. "I told you," he whispered, "it's not just your brother anymore." He wasn't shaking because he feared my brother, he was shaking because of whoever might be connected to him. That was the part he hadn't explained. That was the part that made the situation darker, heavier, more alarming than anything I imagined. The car's engine suddenly shut off. My dad flinched. We both held still, waiting for something. Footsteps, a door opening, someone approaching the house. But nothing happened. The silence outside was almost worse than sound. It meant waiting. It meant uncertainty. It meant the tension wasn't going anywhere. I stepped back from the window and faced my dad. "You need to tell me the truth now," I said quietly. "Whatever you're hiding, it's already here. You can't protect me by keeping things secret anymore." He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, hands pressed to his forehead. "I thought I could fix everything before it reached this point," he said. "I thought if I gave him the money he would get out of whatever he was involved in. I thought it would help him start over, make better choices. But it didn't," I said. He shook his head slowly. "No, it made things worse." I stood there, trying to remain calm even as fear crawled under my skin. "What did he use the money for?" My dad didn't answer right away. His breathing grew shallow. "He trusted the wrong people," he finally said. "He told me he had a chance to invest, to build something big. He said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But I could see the desperation in his eyes. That's why I sold the house so fast." My heart dropped. "So he pushed you?" "He didn't threaten me," my dad said quickly. "Not directly. But he was scared. And when he gets scared, he makes promises he can't keep. He got tied up in something he can't walk away from." I covered my mouth, trying to process his words. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about pressure, fear, and the kind of mess that pulls more people in as it grows. "And now," Dad continued, his voice trembling, "they think I know where the rest of the money is." I stared at him. "The rest? You mean he lost it?" "He didn't lose it," Dad whispered. "He used it. And the people he dealt with expected more. He promised them more. Money he never actually had." I felt the weight of that sink into the room like a heavy fog. "So they think you're hiding something for him?" Dad nodded weakly. "He told them I had savings. He told them I was getting more money soon. He told them I'd make things right if he couldn't." His voice broke. "He dragged me into it without telling me. And now he thinks you ran away with something?" I asked. Dad shut his eyes. "Yes. Because he can't admit to them that he lied." The car outside made a soft clicking sound, the unmistakable noise of a door unlocking. My dad's eyes snapped open. He stood up quickly, pacing back and forth. "This is my fault," he murmured. "I should have told you sooner. I should have gone to someone for help before things got this far." He moved toward the window again but stayed on the side, keeping out of sight. I watched him peek with only half his face showing. I could see the fear now, not panic but the heavy kind that sat deep in his chest. "Are they dangerous?" I whispered. My dad hesitated. Then he nodded once. My heart started racing so fast I could barely breathe. I checked the front door, making sure it was locked. Then I checked it again, even though I knew I was just doing it to stay calm. The quiet outside felt unnerving, like someone was waiting for the perfect moment. A shadow moved behind the windshield. Someone was in the car. And they were watching. I backed away from the window slowly. My dad was pacing, running a hand through his hair like he was trying to think fast, but his mind kept slipping. He kept whispering things under his breath, short sentences, half ideas, regretful apologies. "This wasn't supposed to touch you," he said. "I thought I could shield you." I swallowed hard. "Well, it's here. So what do we do?" He stopped pacing but didn't look at me. His face was tight with worry. "Your brother made promises he couldn't fulfill. And now they think he's hiding behind me. They think I'm the one blocking things." "Blocking what?" "Repayment," he whispered. "Information. Cooperation. Everything." My chest tightened. "Is that why you left the house? Why you came here?" Yes, he said softly. They went to the house. They asked questions. They tore through everything looking for something that doesn't exist. He exhaled shakily. I had to get out before they pressured me into giving them something I don't have. A chill went down my spine. Dad, did they hurt you? He shook his head. They didn't need to. Their message was clear. What message? My dad looked at me with eyes that had lost every bit of their usual strength. They said if he didn't come up with the money, they'd come to me next. The room felt colder as those words settled. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was the realization that something was closing in. Something serious. Something neither of us was prepared for. The car door finally opened. I heard it clearly this time. A slow, deliberate sound. My dad stiffened, eyes locked on the window. I stepped beside him even though part of me wanted to hide behind the wall. But I needed to see. I needed to know what was coming. A figure stepped out of the car. Tall, facing our house. They didn't move closer, didn't knock, didn't speak. They just stood there, looking toward the porch like they were assessing something. Maybe checking if my dad was inside, maybe deciding what to do next. My dad took a small step backward. What do they want? I whispered. His voice cracked. They want your brother, and they think I know where he is. The figure took one slow step toward the walkway. Just one. But it was enough to make my dad whisper something that made the back of my neck prickle. It's happening. They found me. The moment before everything broke loose hung thick in the air, full of tension, fear, and the weight of secrets that were finally catching up to us. And then, the person started walking toward our door. The room fell silent for a moment, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to press against your chest. Everyone had just witnessed the tension spike, but before anyone could catch their breath, something even more unexpected happened. It started with a single vibration on the table, then another, then three more. All the phones lit up at the same time, displaying the same alert. At first, no one reacted. But when the notification preview appeared, revealing a message none of them expected, the atmosphere shifted again, this time sharper, deeper, and far more dangerous. The message came from a number they all recognized instantly, even if they wished they didn't. It was from someone who was supposed to have been out of the picture for good, someone who had caused enough trouble in the past that even hearing their name tightened everyone's stomach. The content of the message made the room feel colder. It claimed that everything happening now, the arguments, the misunderstandings, the sudden shift in loyalties, wasn't just coincidence. Someone in the house had been feeding private information to this person all along. Someone had been lying the whole time. The shock hit everyone differently. Some froze. Others looked around the room, trying to read each face for a trace of guilt. The story had already been tense, but now the suspicion in the air was thick enough to cut through. And the timing couldn't have been worse. They were already standing on edge, already questioning each other's intentions, but this new twist pushed the conflict into a darker, more dangerous direction. No one wanted to believe that a betrayal like this could come from inside the family or the circle of close friends. But the evidence was right there on their screens. Voices began to rise again, not in anger this time, but in fear and disbelief. Everyone wanted to know who had brought this trouble back into their lives. No one had an answer. And the more they searched each other's faces, the more panic crept in. The sense of unity they once had felt completely shattered. Trust had been shaken earlier, but now it felt like it was falling apart completely. The stakes doubled in seconds, leaving them uncertain about who they could rely on and what would happen next. Then, almost as if on cue, another message arrived. This one held even more weight. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a clue, one that pointed directly to something hidden inside the house. Something none of them had known about. Something that might contain the truth about who was responsible for all the chaos. The clue hinted at a place only a few people would ever think to check, a place that held old secrets none of them had talked about in years. Everyone stood frozen, knowing that checking it could change everything. It could clear the innocent or expose the guilty. It could end the confusion, or destroy someone completely. Hearts raced as they exchanged uncertain glances. No one wanted to move first. No one wanted to be the one to uncover what that message meant. But they also knew they couldn't ignore it. The story had reached a point where every second mattered. Slowly, almost unwillingly, they started moving toward the room where the clue pointed. Each step felt heavier than the last. The corridor seemed longer than ever, like it was stretching with every thought of what they might find. The tension built so naturally that even breathing felt loud. Every shadow felt suspicious. Every sound felt amplified. The fear wasn't about what was inside the room, it was about what the truth would do to them once it finally came out. When they finally reached the place, no one wanted to be the first to open the door. Their hands hesitated. Their eyes avoided each other. The conflict that had already shaken them was now turning into something deeper, something rooted in secrets they never wanted to see again. And just when someone finally gathered the courage to reach for the handle, a sharp noise echoed from behind them, quick, unexpected, and loud enough to make everyone jump. They turned around in shock. Another twist. Another secret. Another moment that pushed them even closer to the edge. And now, they were more unsure than ever about who was telling the truth, who was hiding something, and what would happen when the next layer of the story finally peeled open. They all froze, staring at the shadow that moved across the hallway. For a second, no one breathed. The tension had already been stretched thin, and now it felt like it might snap. Slowly, they turned back toward the sound, expecting the worst. But instead of a stranger or some hidden threat, it was someone they all knew, someone they thought had left earlier because they didn't want to be part of the drama. It was the one person none of them suspected. They stepped forward calmly, almost too calmly, holding something in their hand. A small, old notebook, the one hidden in the room the mysterious message had pointed them to. Everyone's eyes widened. No one even had the chance to ask how they found it first. The person just opened it and said, "I think it's time you all know the truth." The room went quiet again as they flipped through the pages. Inside were handwritten notes, messages, old receipts, and little pieces of information gathered over months. At first, it looked like evidence against the family. But then the real truth came out. The notebook wasn't about exposing anyone, it was about protecting them. The person standing before them had been trying to keep the past troublemaker from returning. They had been feeding fake information, creating distractions, and blocking attempts to stir chaos. The problem was that their plan backfired when the other person twisted the details and sent out that alarming message. Everyone looked stunned. The whole conflict, the arguments, the doubt, the suspicion, had grown from a misunderstanding built on incomplete truths. Slowly, the tension began to melt as the person explained everything. How they had been secretly communicating with the troublemaker only to keep them away, how they gathered details to stop their influence, and how they had been planning to reveal it once everything settled. But the message came too early, turning their quiet effort into a massive storm. People exchanged looks, hurt, relieved, but mostly overwhelmed. The biggest conflict of the story finally made sense. The guilt lifted from the innocent, and the fear of betrayal faded as everyone realized the intention behind all of it was protection, not harm. It wasn't perfect and it didn't erase the arguments, but it at least brought clarity. Someone finally stepped forward, voice shaking slightly, and asked why they didn't just tell everyone from the start. The answer was simple, almost painfully human. They didn't want the family or friends to worry, or to feel like the past was creeping back into their lives. They believed handling it alone was safer. But in trying to shield everyone, they ended up creating the very confusion they hoped to avoid. Just as the mood softened and everyone began to breathe again, something unexpected happened, the final twist no one saw coming. The phones buzzed once more. Another message popped up. But this time it wasn't from the troublemaker. It was a screenshot sent from an unknown number showing a live camera feed aimed right at the house. The image was grainy but clear enough to send a chill through everyone. Someone had been watching them the entire time, recording everything, every argument, every secretive glance, every tense moment. The previous troublemaker wasn't the only one involved. There was someone else, someone none of them had even thought of, someone who had been pulling strings quietly from the outside. The room filled with a new kind of silence, heavier, sharper, and colder. The major conflict had been resolved, but a deeper mystery had just opened up. The person behind the camera wasn't revealed, but their presence was undeniable. And the message that came with the screenshot was simple. This is only the beginning. Everyone's heartbeat echoed louder than the quiet around them. The climax resolved their biggest struggle, but now a new shadow lingered, hinting that the story wasn't as finished as they thought. Everyone stared at the screenshot like it was something alive, something capable of stepping out of the phone and into the room. For a long moment, no one moved. The earlier tension had been sharp and personal, but this felt different. Colder. Farther reaching. It wasn't about old family issues or misunderstandings anymore. It was something outside, watching, waiting. The silence stretched on until finally someone exhaled shakily and said what everyone else was thinking. "We need to figure out who sent this." The person holding the phone tried calling the unknown number, but it went straight to a dead tone. No ring. No voicemail. Nothing. Just emptiness, like whoever had contacted them existed only in shadows. A few years ago this kind of thing would have spiraled into panic, but after everything they had already gone through, there was a strange steadiness settling in. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe courage, maybe both. They decided they weren't going to be pushed into fear again. Not after they had just fought their way through the chaos caused by assumptions and secrets. They gathered in the living room, sitting close the way people do when they suddenly realize they need each other more than they expected. Someone brought out the notebook, the one that had caused so much confusion but had also cleared so many things up. They flipped through it again, searching for anything, any detail that might connect to the mysterious camera feed. Names, dates, small notes scribbled in the margins, all clues but none leading anywhere specific. Then they realized the most important part wasn't the notebook itself, but the person who had created it. They sat down beside them and asked, gently this time, if there was anyone else who might be involved. Maybe someone who knew about the past issues. Maybe someone who had held a grudge quietly. At first they shook their head, insisting they had acted alone. But then a memory came, a person who had once tried inserting themselves into the family drama years ago. Not out of concern but out of curiosity. Someone who liked stirring things up from the sidelines, whispering in ears whenever trouble brewed, someone who always acted harmless but never really was. As soon as their name was spoken out loud, everything clicked into place. They weren't a direct threat, never had been. But they loved chaos. They loved watching people unravel. It wasn't surprising they would do something like this. Send a screenshot, create tension, then disappear. They didn't want responsibility. They just wanted reactions. The room breathed easier. It didn't make the situation okay, but it made it understandable. And understanding brings calm. One by one, people started speaking, something they hadn't really done honestly through the whole ordeal. They apologized to one another, not in grand dramatic speeches, but in small, simple words that actually felt real. Someone admitted they should have trusted more. Someone else said they had let their temper get ahead of the truth. Another admitted they had been scared and didn't know how to say it. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first time in a long time everyone sounded like themselves again. Then came the question no one had wanted to confront earlier. What were they going to do now? Not about the screenshot, they knew they could handle whoever sent it by ignoring the bait, but about the bigger picture. The situation that had brought them all together that night. The misunderstandings. The mistrust. The distance that had built up over the years without anyone noticing. They realized they couldn't undo the past, but they could choose what happened next. Someone suggested choosing unity instead of fear. Rebuilding instead of assuming. Talk more, hide less. Understand instead of jumping to conclusions. It sounded simple, maybe too simple, but sometimes the hardest solutions begin with small steps. And they all knew that if they didn't try, they'd end up right back where they were, isolated, defensive, suspicious. Slowly they gathered up the messages, the notebook, the emotions, all of it, and made a quiet decision together. The family drama ended that night. The outside troublemaker had no more power if they refused to give it to them. The past had no more weight if they stopped dragging it behind them. And the misunderstandings had no more space to grow if they chose honesty instead of silence. The tension that had hung over the room all night finally lifted. Not because everything was fixed, but because everyone was ready to let things heal. People began putting on coats, gathering their things, preparing to leave after what felt like the longest day of their lives. There was a new kind of tiredness in the air, one that comes after clarity, not after conflict. Before they went their separate ways, they gathered in the doorway, almost instinctively, like they didn't want to walk away without acknowledging how far they had come in just a few hours. Someone said softly, "We'll do better now." And for once, it wasn't just a polite promise. It felt real. As they stepped outside, the night air felt calmer than it had earlier, as if the world had taken a deep breath with them. The fear they felt from the screenshot was still there, but it didn't own them anymore. It was just another reminder of the importance of staying connected, staying grounded, and not letting outside noise shake the foundation of what really mattered. The person who had been the center of most of the misunderstandings lingered for a moment, staring back at the house. They thought about how close things had come to falling apart. About how easily chaos could distract people from the truth. About how important it was to speak up before silence becomes its own kind of damage. They promised themselves they would never let things build up like that again, not for their sake and not for the people they cared about. When they finally walked away, there was a sense of quiet closure in the air. Things weren't perfect, but they were honest now. And honesty is what heals, slowly but surely. The next morning, everyone woke up with a different kind of feeling, lighter, clearer. The mysterious number never contacted them again. The camera feed disappeared as quickly as it had come. And in the weeks that followed, the family stuck to their promise. They talked more. They listened better. They didn't jump to conclusions. It wasn't dramatic change, but steady, meaningful effort. Months passed, and the events of that night slowly turned into a story they could look back on, Not with anger or fear, but with understanding. It became the moment everything shifted. The moment they stopped letting old wounds direct the future. The moment they realized the real threat had never been outside, it was the silence and assumptions between them. And the biggest takeaway of all was simple. Families stay strong not by being perfect, but by choosing each other even in the most confusing, unsettling moments. Problems don't disappear overnight, but unity makes them smaller. Trust makes them bearable. And communication keeps them from returning. In the end, they didn't just survive the chaos, they grew from it. They learned to hold on to what mattered, let go of what didn't, and keep moving forward without letting fear lead the way. And without even noticing it, that night became the turning point that brought them closer than they had been in years.